Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're strapping in for a really essential journey. We're going to get into the true economics of the digital world by tackling Shoshana Zuboff's massive work, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism.
That's a big one.
It's huge. And it does so much more than just talk about privacy. I mean, it fundamentally redefines the relationship between technology, the economy, and, your life, your individual life.
That's exactly right. And I think our mission today is to really unpack this radical transformation.
Yeah.
To understand how these digital spaces that we all celebrated for, freedom and connection.
Right. The early dream.
How they mutated so quickly into this new form of market power. We have to get past this idea of just data misuse.
Yeah, that term feels so small now.
It is. We need to grasp the logic of surveillance capitalism, SC, as she calls it, as a completely new economic architecture.
It reminds me of that early vision people had, this beautiful idea of the digital age, like the Aware Home project, where all the knowledge from your data was just for your benefit. And it was built on this unwavering commitment to privacy.
And Zuboff's whole point is that vision it's been annihilated. It's been replaced by this voracious, completely novel commercial project.
And the shift has been so fast, so total, and so unilateral that it's created this, what she calls a universal anxiety.
Exactly. It's the psychological fallout. We're all living with these technologies, but their fundamental economic logic is hidden from us. It operates without our consent. It feels like the ground is just constantly changing.
It really does. It speaks to that, that deep human need for a sanctuary.
Yeah.
For a safe space.
For a home.
A home. A place where your own future can unfold without being, externally managed. And when that sense of refuge slips away, that's when you get this deep distress.
And that feeling, that's what we're going to dive into. We need to explore the specific mechanisms driving it.
Okay.
So we'll focus on three big ideas. First, the behavioral surplus, what is actually being taken from you. Second, the move from just predicting your behavior to actively modifying it.
That's the scary part.
And finally, the rise of what she calls instrumentarian power, a new way of governing society using remote, automated influence.
Okay, let's do it. To really get this, I think we first need to establish the old order. Let's talk about industrial capitalism. So when we think about the old giants, the Henry Fords, the Thomas Edisons, what was the basic logic of that era? The one that ran the global economy for a century.
The foundational logic was pretty straightforward. It was the profitable transformation of nature's raw materials into commodities.
Simple as that.
Simple as that. You take crude oil, you turn it into gasoline, you take steel, you make a Model T. The whole system was driven by maximizing the output of material things.
And Ford's assembly line is the perfect example.
It's the classic example. High volume, low unit cost, making his product accessible to as many people as possible.
And despite all the huge social changes it brought, the factory towns, the pollution, at its heart, the system was responding to a really basic human need.
It was. If you look at it from a sociological view, it was aligned with what Durkheim called the human quest to live effectively.
To survive.
To survive and thrive in your conditions of existence. People needed food, shelter, clothes, transportation. Industrial capitalism, for all its flaws, answered that call.
And it funded itself by reinvesting its profits, its surplus, back into making more stuff more efficiently.
Exactly. The imperative was profitable production of goods and services.
Okay, so now, let's make that critical jump. The invention of surveillance capitalism. If Ford was transforming nature's raw materials, what's the raw material for this new system?
This is the absolute core of it. Surveillance capitalism lays claim to a totally different and, frankly, much more intimate raw material, private human experience.
No.
It's the stuff of your life, your emotions, your conversations, your physical movements, your health. All of it is scraped, torn, and taken as the raw material for a new kind of product.
So we've gone from turning iron ore into a car
to
turning a fleeting human feeling into a prediction product.
Yeah, you got it. And that distinction is so critical because it completely changes the nature of the economic harm.
It's not material harm.
It's existential harm. And that's why Zuboff pushes back so hard on the argument that, the problem is just that users aren't getting paid for their data.
Right, the pay me for my data argument.
She calls that a feat of misdirection.
Why a misdirection?
Yeah.
I mean, on the surface, it seems like a practical solution.
Because if we start putting a price on it, if we say, okay, you can have my search history for 5 cents, We're just institutionalizing the whole thing. We're legitimizing the extraction.
We're agreeing to the terms.
We are accepting the premise that our private human experience is raw material for someone else's factory. The real issue isn't fair compensation. It's the right to appropriate it in the first place. It's an economic logic that is hostile to the idea of a sovereign individual.
That puts it in perspective. So if industrial capitalism dangerously disrupted the natural world, polluted rivers, destroyed forests, the really profound question becomes,
what havoc might surveillance capitalism wreak on human nature itself?
the disruption is internal.
It is. Industrial capitalism created an environmental crisis. Surveillance capitalism creates a crisis of the self. It threatens to just dissolve the boundaries between our private and public lives. But to get that, we have to look at the engine, the operational mechanism that makes it all so profitable.
Okay, so this is the technical heart of it. And surveillance capitalism, it didn't start as some grand evil plan. It started as an emergency.
A moment of crisis.
Yeah, whereas late 2000. Google's a success, but suddenly they're facing massive investor anxiety. They need to show sustained and exponential profits.
And that was the inflection point, because Google's founders, they were actually philosophically opposed to traditional advertising.
I thought it was corrupting.
Right. But the financial pressure forced them into what Zuboff calls a state of exception. They had to basically annul the unspoken promise they had with their users.
The promise being, we only use your data to make our search results better.
Exactly. That reciprocal relationship. They had to find a way to make money, and they found a radically new way.
And the mutation was all in how they used the data. So initially, data like click-throughs, error reports, that was all just for service refinement, the behavioral value reinvestment cycle. How did that get hijacked?
Well, the data signals that were collected just to make the search engine work better were secretly subordinated. They were redirected to ad targeting. And not just the data needed for the service, but all the collateral data around it. The realization that they could collect and keep data way beyond what was necessary. That was the true invention.
And that brings us to the key economic term, behavioral surplus. How do we define that precisely? What makes it different from just, data exhaust?
Behavioral surplus is the data generated that is in excess of what is strictly required to run the service.
Can you give an example?
Sure. You search for a restaurant, that's the core service. The firm sees your query, the surplus is everything else. Your exact GPS coordinates when you searched, how fast you were moving, the type of phone you used, its battery level, your proximity to other people, what you were browsing before the search and where you went online after the search. This huge, highly predictive cloud of data that became the foundation of their whole logic of accumulation.
So their public mission organizing the world's information was now secretly serving this other mission, accumulating surplus.
Completely.
So how did they turn all this messy, raw data into something advertisers would pay a fortune for?
They created the predictive product. What Google did was they took the online ad auction that already existed and they added this transformational enhancement that was only possible because of the surplus. They called it the quality score.
The quality score.
And the score was the output of their advanced proprietary machine learning models trained exclusively on that massive behavioral surplus.
What kind of information went into that score to make it so valuable?
Everything. The models were trained on click-through rates, how long you spent on a page, the likelihood you'd convert, but also all this incredibly detailed inferred data.
Inferred data.
Yeah, things they figured out about you, your specific demographics, your psychographic profile, your politics, your likely relationship status. All of this allowed them to predict with terrifying accuracy whether a specific person you would engage with a specific ad.
And it all sounds so complex, but also deliberately secretive. I mean, if the quality score is so important, why wouldn't the advertisers get to see how it works? Isn't that like the opposite of a transparent market?
It's totally anti-market in that sense.
Right.
But it's perfectly logical for surveillance capitalism. Secrecy is fundamental.
Right.
Google intentionally created a black box because that complexity became a hiding strategy. They could win softly, as Zuboff puts it. They maintained this cloak of invisibility over the whole operation, which solidified their economic dominance and made it almost impossible for anyone, competitors, regulators, to challenge what they were doing.
They turned their technical ability into an economic moat.
An insurmountable one.
And the result of all this is a really uncomfortable truth for us, for the user. You are less valuable as a person using a service than the financial bets that other people are placing on your future behavior.
That is the bottom line. That's the ultimate destination of the surplus. These high-certainty predictions about what you'll click, what you'll buy, how you'll vote, they're sold in these brand new marketplaces.
Wow.
Behavioral futures markets.
A stock market for human behavior.
In a way, yes. And that breakthrough, which was confirmed after Google's IPO in 2004, it triggered this intense decession competition. Every other tech firm, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, they all rushed in to build their own supply routes of behavioral surplus.
And that logic has now spread way beyond Silicon Valley, right? Through something called surveillance as a service, or SVOS.
Oh, it's everywhere. The logic is now the default operating system for digital life.
Give us an example outside of big tech.
Okay, think about digital lenders, especially those who target people with lower credit scores. They don't just look at your financial history, they mine your intimate behavioral data.
Ow.
They get access to your text messages, your GPS, your social media network, your communication patterns. They build predictive models of loan repayment based on that. If your phone battery is often low, or if you visit certain places frequently, that becomes an input that determines your interest rate.
That's incredible. And we see this with landlords and employers, too. These vetting services that scrape your private messages to calculate a financial stress level.
Exactly. And this is where that concept of the Faustian bargain becomes so real. If you're struggling, if you need a job, an apartment, a loan, you're trapped.
You have no choice.
You're forced into this trade where your privacy and your personal sovereignty are the price you pay just to participate in society. Surveillance capitalism has made itself essential for the people with the fewest options.
Okay, so we've covered the extraction and the prediction, but now we get to the next phase, the step that makes this system truly dangerous. The advance from just predicting what you will do to making sure you do it. And this starts with the drive for what Zuboff calls economies of scope.
That's the imperative. The prediction market demands ever greater certainty. And to get that certainty, you need two things: vast volume of data, which is scale, and ever-increasing variety and intimacy, which is scope.
So the firms are in this race to seize, as she puts it, fresh, unexpected chunks of human experience.
An endless race.
Let's talk about the breadth of that first, the extension. I mean, a Facebook like button is a classic example.
It was a brilliant piece of engineering from their perspective. It was positioned as this harmless little communication tool.
I like this. Simple.
But it was secretly a massive supply mechanism. Researchers found it was continuously capturing and sending back behavioral surplus, installing cookies, tracking your activity, even if you weren't logged into Facebook.
Even if you weren't a Facebook member at all?
At all. It meant Facebook's tentacles reached across millions of websites, constantly collecting and converting everything you did online into raw material.
And this leads to what you called illegible surveillance, where the mechanism is just totally hidden. That FIDS up example is just, it's shocking.
FIDS up really shows the audacity. This was a technology that used inaudible sonic tones, a digital watermark, that were played through speakers in retail stores.
Inaudible.
Completely silent to the human ear. But if your phone had an affiliated app on it, and it could be something totally innocent like a car magazine app, your phone's microphone would detect that tone and confirm your physical location.
So you could be tracked moving around a store in Paris, and you would have absolutely no idea. It bypasses everything.
No idea. It bypasses the Android permission system. It bypasses human awareness. It's just there.
And the sheer number of these trackers is staggering. The simplest apps on your phone, a flashlight app, a weather app, they're often infested with dozens of these programs running invisibly.
It's a systemic design choice. It's not an accident, but that's just the breadth. The ambition goes deeper into the depth of the self.
Right, plumbing your personality, your moods, your emotions.
This is where the really predictive, really lucrative surplus is. We're at a point now where computer-based personality judgments trained on your digital behavior can be more accurate than your friends' or family's assessments.
That's a famous study.
It is. These algorithms can predict your personality, your politics, your satisfaction with life, just by analyzing how you write your Facebook messages. The private inner self is just flattened into data points for the certainty factory.
Okay, this brings us to the critical shift. Economies of action. If you can predict with 90% certainty, why not intervene and engineer 100% certainty?
Exactly. That is the core realization. The surest way to predict behavior is to intervene at the source and shape it.
The whole system pivots.
The whole system pivots. The machine processes are no longer just observing. They're configured to nudge, tune, herd, manipulate, and modify behavior at scale. This is where the digital infrastructure, the means of production, is now serving the new means of behavioral modification.
So this is way more than just a targeted ad. It's about engineering a specific outcome. What's the perfect real-world example of this?
Pokemon Go. It is the perfect case study. It was developed by Niantic, which was a Google-incubated company. And it wasn't just a game.
It was a massive experiment.
A massive, real-world, controlled experiment in economies of action. The augmented reality interface literally herded huge populations of players through real-world physical locations,
The Pokestops and gyms.
which were established by paying customers, like McDonald's or Starbucks.
So if McDonald's paid Niantic, the game didn't just predict that players might go to McDonald's.
It guaranteed that foot traffic would be delivered to McDonald's.
Wow.
The game's rules were designed to elicit and reinforce the exact behaviors that the paying customers wanted. The player, caught up in the fun of the game, voluntarily submits to the engineering. This creates guaranteed outcomes, a habitat of manufactured certainty.
This guarantee mentality leads straight to the idea of the uncontract, the denial of your autonomy enforced by an automated system. Tell us about the Kipping's Buick.
The Kipping story is so important because it just strips away all the digital abstraction. It shows the cold, coercive power.
Right.
Pat and Stanford Kipping, they were an elderly couple in Illinois. They fell behind on a small $95 payment for their old Buick.
Yeah.
Their credit union had installed a remote system in the car. It was baked right into the technology. And the rule was simple. If you fail to pay, the car shuts down.
And it did.
It did. The system bypassed every single social process we rely on. Negotiation, explanation, human connection, compassion.
There was no person to talk to.
No. A tow truck driver, Jim Ford, he saw what happened and he wanted to help. He even offered to pay the debt himself. But the automated system, the uncontract, it insisted he had to follow the strict process. Certainty has to replace trust. Automated governance has to replace human relationships.
It's the physical version of being governed by a black box.
Right.
So we've got the mechanics, extraction, and modification. Now let's talk about the biggest philosophical implication, the rise of a new kind of power. Zuboff calls it instrumentarianism. And you said earlier she really pushes back on the Big Brother comparison. Why isn't this just Orwell's 1984?
Yeah. Because totalitarianism, the kind Orwell or Hannah Arendt wrote about, was a project of the state. And its goal was the total possession of the human soul.
It required violence.
It required physical coercion, torture, secret police. Its motive was ideological. Its method was violence.
And instrumentarianism, on the other hand,
Yeah.
it's a project of the market.
Yeah.
And its goal isn't possession, it's...
Total certainty. Exactly. Its motive is commercial profit, and its method is remote influence and automated governance. It achieves a similar level of control, but not with jackboots and prisms. It uses seamless digital architecture and personalized nudges.
The means of production now serves the means of behavioral modification.
That's the line.
Where does this thinking even come from?
Well, it has deep roots in the behaviorist tradition. People like John B. Watson and especially B.F. Skinner.
Skinner, right. Walden, too.
Exactly. Skinner argued that our human idea of freedom is just an illusion. It's an illusion that comes from not having enough information. The behaviorist dream is a rational, engineered society where behavior is perfectly predicted and shaped for efficiency.
And surveillance capitalism finally has the technology to build that utopia or dystopia.
Right, and this power is deployed through this massive infrastructure that Zuboff calls Big Other.
Big Other.
It's the sprawling networked apparatus. We're talking 15 global data centers, 2.5 million servers, the largest computer network on Earth. And it generates the proprietary knowledge needed to govern social life by predicting and shaping it.
And the consequence of being constantly surrounded by Big Other is the erosion of what she calls the right to the future tense. That's such a powerful idea.
It's the essential condition for free will. The right to the future tense is your ability to imagine, to intend, to promise, to construct your own future, to be the author of your own life.
Right.
And as Arendt said, the will is the organ for the future. It relies on uncertainty, on ambiguity. When a system tries to eliminate all that uncertainty to guarantee every outcome, it stifles the inner resources you need to will yourself into action.
You become just a cog in a machine built for someone else's profit.
A very predictable cog.
So the loss of autonomy happens inside you, even before any force is applied. But there's also the physical loss of sanctuary, the home.
Yes, the ancient privilege of refuge, the inviolable space of home is It's just being swallowed whole. We think of the home as the center of opposition. House versus universe, private versus public.
But when the world is chattering in your smart toothbrush,
When a server somewhere else is watching your kitchen appliances, when your front door lock is managed remotely, those boundaries just vanish. There's no true solitary inwardness anymore. The locks are gone because the surveillance is seamless.
which leads to that really chilling quote, "If you've got nothing to hide, you are nothing."
Because without that space for concealment, for private reflection, how do you develop a unique self? It becomes deeply compromised.
And we see the psychological toll of this everywhere, especially with young people. The youth who are forced to come of age inside this digital hive, owned and operated by surveillance capital.
The research on social media and mental health is pretty clear. The dominant psychological process in that world is relentless social comparison.
It's all about the metrics, the likes, the followers.
Yeah.
You're constantly evaluating yourself against an external standard.
Exactly. And whether that needle moves up and you get an ego boost or it moves down and you get an ego injury, that comparison is the flywheel. It powers this closed loop of self-evaluation.
And that habitat favors people who look outward for cues, not inward.
It does. It makes it so much harder to do the essential developmental task of becoming an adult, which is differentiating your unique self from everyone else and becoming the author of your own story.
So when that entire process is subject to this behavioral engineering, you get the normalization of what Zuboff calls the automation of the self. The natural response to all of this, to having your autonomy managed, should be resistance. But first, you have to fight the ideology that says resistance is pointless.
Inevitabilism.
Inevitabilism. This is the core Silicon Valley rhetoric, right?
Yeah.
That all of this is just the natural or inevitable expression of the technology.
Exactly. You had Eric Schmidt musing that, search engines, including Google, do retain this information for some time, as if it's a law of physics,
Yeah.
as if it's not a deliberate corporate choice made for profit.
She calls it an existential narcotic.
It is. It's designed to make you feel resigned. It's the same logic that says you just have to accept the rules because they come from some unchallengeable autonomous process.
But Zuboff's point is that this is just false.
It's fundamentally false. People built this system. Men and women made market choices and organizational choices. They choose not to control it. The claim of inevitability is a strategy to eliminate human agency from the conversation entirely.
And unfortunately, the political landscape after 9/11 gave this ideology the perfect place to grow.
That's her concept of elective affinity, this mutual magnetism between the state and the private sector.
They had shared interests.
Post 9/11 brought in an era of surveillance exceptionalism. The state's hunger for information dominance created this lawless habitat when it came to privacy. The state wanted the private sector's data capabilities. The private sector wanted the state's legitimacy and its contracts.
Like the NSA awarding contracts to Google.
Exactly. And that shared appetite for information dominance just solidified the entire architecture of Big Other.
Okay, so that brings us to one of the earliest and really courageous legal challenges to this.
Yeah.
The fight for the right to be forgotten.
A pivotal battle. It was championed by the Spanish Data Protection Agency, and it focused on the case of a man named Mario Costeja Gonzalez.
I love this story.
He had some old, embarrassing news articles about minor financial problems from years ago, and they kept showing up at the top of Google searches for his name long after the issues were totally resolved.
So it was denying him the chance to move on.
It denied him the chance to reclaim his identity. The argument was that because of Google, things that human memory or paper records would let fade away, they remained forever young and forever at the top of his digital identity.
And the European court's ruling in 2014 was huge.
It was seismic. The court confirmed that citizens have the right to reclaim their history, the right to decide that not all information deserves to be immortal. It was a direct assertion of individual sovereignty against the system's logic of total recall.
But the tech giants did not take it well.
Not at all. Larry Page suggested people should trust Google more than democratic courts. Eric Schmidt called it a balance that was struck wrong. It showed just how entrenched they were. They saw this data as their property, untouchable even by a democratic mandate.
Which leads us to the biggest piece of regulatory action so far, the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR.
The GDPR is a vital tool because it attacks the legitimacy of surveillance capitalism at its root. It completely shifts the burden of proof. It forces companies to justify what they're doing with data.
And it requires a high bar for consent.
A very high bar. Consent must be specific and informed. It requires privacy by design. It asserts the right to erasure. And the penalties are huge, up to 4% of global revenue. So it's a direct threat to the financial model.
And of course, the market response was immediate evasion.
Oh, yeah. Facebook's response was a masterclass in deflection. Publicly, they said they'd apply the GDPR in spirit everywhere.
But in practice,
In practice, they quietly issued new terms of service for 1.5 billion international users, moving them all under U.S. privacy law to exempt them from the GDPR's protections. They literally rerouted global populations to protect their supply chain.
that just shows the scale of the fight. But even with all that defiance, we are seeing resistance on the civic front, this brilliant artistic vanguard dedicated to invisibility.
And this resistance is such a powerful signal that glass life is intolerable. You see it in practical tools like signal-blocking phone cases, but also in these artistic statements.
Like the LED privacy visors or the glamouflage clothing designed to fool facial recognition.
Or the /toolkit for protesters with its off-grid communication routers.
There's also that software, the demetricator, that just deletes the public counts of likes and friends from your social media.
These are all acts of reclaiming meaning, defending the self from the metrics of the hive. They are essential counter-declarations that human dignity requires a sanctuary.
But Zuboff also has a warning there.
She does. While these acts of hiding are poignant and necessary, they risk just becoming an adaptation to this new reality, rather than a rallying cry for systemic outrage and political action. The fight has to be to challenge the architecture itself, not just to find clever ways to hide under it.
So the challenge is moving from personal resistance to coordinated action.
So if we connect all of these threads, from the secret invention of the behavioral surplus to the automated enforcement of the uncontract and the normalizing power of instrumentarianism, we can see that surveillance capitalism isn't just a business model.
Yeah.
It's a globally ascendant form of social ordering, and it risks normalizing the automation of the self for the sake of somebody else's guaranteed outcomes for corporate profit.
This whole system really presents a profound Faustian bargain for you, for the individual. It pits convenience and an effective life against your autonomy and your personal sanctuary.
Yeah.
So, given this relentless intensification of extraction and this overwhelming ideology of inevitabilism, the crucial question really remains, what specific coordinated forms of action, from demanding robust legislation like an expanded GDPR to practicing your own deliberate acts of hiding and resistance, what will you take to defend your essential right to the future tense?
Because that future tense, it requires uncertainty, it requires promises, and it requires the freedom to will your own life into being. If the market succeeds in its demand for total certainty over human behavior, that freedom will be lost.
This has been a deep dive into the monumental work of Shoshana Zuboff. If you'd prefer a shorter visual breakdown of these ideas, check the description for the Mini Explainer companion video. And if you're watching the Mini Explainer first, you'll find a link back to this full deep dive for deeper exploration.